Right, and with that agreement, we understand 80,000 refugees have already gone back to Somalia. Both people signing this agreement have agreed that they're giving a soft landing to those people moving back. Kenya has about 610 documented Somali refugees and just about 500 who are undocumented. And in effect, that signature will ensure that 1 million refugees will head back to Somalia within a period of 3 years. There are pros and cons, there are people for and against this repatriation. But to help us make sense of what is happening is Rufus Karanja, the program officer from Consortium of Refugees in Kenya. And he'll be here to just help us understand this. Rufus, we're talking about 1 million people going back to Somalia. First, just paint to us a clear picture of how a repatriation should happen legally.
Thank you, Bonnie, and even for having us on this show. To begin with, what actually essentially is happening is that we saw yesterday the government of Kenya, the government of Somalia, and UNHCR, the three parties who signed the tripartite agreement. And this is actually, the tripartite agreement is a legal framework that sort of sets in motion or the modalities on which repatriation should happen. And just to also, as a way of understanding, in issues to do with forced migration or refugee protracted displacement situation, you find that the international community has prescribed 3 durable solutions, or what they call as permanent solutions. And repatriation is only one part of those 3-part solutions, because the others are local integration, where the persons who are fleeing from their country of origin can be locally integrated. For example, like Kenyans, Somalis, Rwandese can be locally integrated in Kenya. The other one is resettlement to third countries, where you find that someone who, for example, is from Somalia has found asylum in Kenya, then because again of continued fears of persecution or because of different protection issues, can be resettled in a third country, for example, the US or different
Netherlands, where they always go.
Yes, exactly. So essentially, so what is happening is that the tripartite agreement sort of sets the modalities on and even the principles, because a key principle of repatriation is that the process must be voluntary. And from the media piece that has just gone on, we've had the Deputy President talking about that the process will be conducted in a voluntary nature. And what that essentially means is that the refugee should not be coerced. They should have a free choice, an informed choice on when they should return. And the thing that we want to make it clear is that repatriation, or the process of repatriating these Somali refugees, it's a process. It's not a one-off event that now yesterday we signed, today they are on buses and going back to Somalia. It's an elongated process, and in fact the tripartite agreement itself provides for a 3-year period, which is renewable, depending again on the situation on the ground, because for repatriation itself to be durable and sustainable, because you don't want a situation where we are saying that now there's a peaceful situation in Somalia, yet we know that the situation on the ground is still very fragile. So that is why it has to be a very gradual and phased out approach.
Rufus, earlier on, a couple of months back, there were calls by the government that they said, we want to close this. And there are a number of civil society agencies that came out to speak against it. Your agency was among those ones.
Yes.
We are seeing a change of music here, and guys are saying now we need to repatriate you voluntary, and it's within a period of 3 years. Why would the country get to a point where they're saying we are closing, our refugee camps?
First of all, I think, Bonnie, we need to appreciate that Kenya, actually within the region, Kenya hosts the largest refugee population. And in fact, even in the world, it hosts one of the biggest refugee camps in the world. And the government of Kenya has been, and even the people of Kenya have been quite hospitable. If you look at actually Kenya, we've been doubted or have been told or praised for being, a country that is peaceful. So you host quite a large number of different nationalities. And it's not just the Somalis. We have a huge population of the Congolese from the DRC. We have Rwandese coming into this place. But within the framework of international community, there's an element that is called burden sharing. And for example, for the caseload of Somalis, we have been hosting Somali refugees for the last 20 years, given, again, the sort of protracted conflict that has been in Somalia. But again, different dynamics have have changed. And again, looking back into 2011, there's been a lot of increase in insecurity in the country. So from the point that the government perhaps is coming from is the element of which they, and this is where we want to sort of create a clear caution, because there's this blanket condemnation of that refugees are being linked.
That was part of the reasons the Kenyan government was saying increase in terrorism, proliferation of arms, you know, insecurity, a lot of aliens in the country without meaningful employment. So obviously they get into crime. But where does that leave genuine refugees, if it were?
One thing that, I mean, we again go back to the asylum space or the asylum regime. We need to appreciate that Kenya has a very accommodative asylum regime in Kenya. We, again, in respect to our international obligations, we have a Refugee Act which was implemented in 2006. But one of the things that we are clearly, because within the system, within the law itself, we are of the collective opinion that the system of asylum, of how when someone is coming into the country, for example, from Uganda, from Rwanda, as they're coming to seek asylum, the law itself provides very clearly, because it provides even for something that we call an exclusion clause. For example, that if you have perhaps in your country of origin performed crimes against humanity, the system, because you undergo what the law provides, is called a refugee status determination process. And this is simply a process that when you come into the country seeking asylum, you are taken through by, at the moment it's UNHCR which conducts that process, but the government gradually is taking up that responsibility. And there are structures, for example, like within the Kenyan system, we have the Department of Refugee Affairs under the Ministry of Immigration. But what we want to clearly point out is that the asylum process or the asylum system itself, it's civilian in character, and there are checks and balances within the system, like the one that I had pointed out, the exclusion clause, which removes this element. But I want to also bring out a specific element, which is a challenge on the issue of security. For a long while, and even you will recall in 2012, in December, the government came out with a directive saying that all refugees who are living within the urban areas will be relocated
to the border points.
It will be relocated to the respective camps. So those of Somali origin will be taken to the Dadaab refugee camp, and those of the other nationalities, Ethiopians, Eritreans, will be taken to Kakuma. But essentially what that happened is that the government or the Department of Refugee Affairs actually stopped registration of any new arrivals. So actually from 2012, December of 2012, there has not been actual registration. So the issue or the challenge that comes into place is that there are new arrivals who are coming into the country and they're not being documented.
Are they unregistered one? Are they what we are calling the 510 figure that the UNHCR has given us as undocumented, or where are these unregistered refugees?
Well, to answer your question, you have to understand the sort of asylum process when someone is coming into Kenya. Either they're coming from DRC, they're coming from Uganda. So the law, the Refugee Act of 2006 provides that when an asylum seeker comes into the country, they have a duty, they have an obligation to present themselves before the appointed officers, the appointed officials of the Department of Refugee Affairs, or even police officers, just to be able to, register their presence. But you find, again, I'm going back to this issue, or that the lack of proper registration and documentation is actually one area that we have always been calling on the government. And also, if you look at even Dadaab, diplomatically between Somalia and Kenya, we have officially closed the border since 2007. So the lack of proper registration and documentation processes could be one of the linkages, one of the reasons as to why we are having this problem with security.
Rufus, let's talk about the economic benefit or burden of refugees in the country. We're talking about repatriating 1 million refugees in 3 years. What impact economically will it have for Kenya or Somalia within this period?
Going back into Kenya has been hosting refugees, and not just Somalis, for quite a long time. If you look at where these particular camps are located, if you look at Kakuma refugee camp, which is in Turkana County, and also if you look at Dadaab, there's been a lot of development initiatives that, different donors have come, and even government partnership initiatives that have come into place. So, and one of the things that we need to appreciate, that there have been economic and development gains that have come with hosting refugees. refugees, because particularly, essentially, if you go to Dadaab right now, one of the key things that has happened is that there's been a lot of schools that have been built by different donors, different agencies. UNHCR in itself,
Kenyatta University is actually operating a campus there.
Exactly, and one of the things that actually we talk about, because the relationship between the refugees and the host communities, even the Kenyan Somalis who are living within the Dadaab district itself, you find that if the schools that are available there, the watering points, the boreholes that are being sunk, those are also accessible to even the local
Kenyan
host,
community living
Kenyan
there.
coast. If you look again, if you cross on the other side of Kakuma, a very interesting perspective happens, and which, of course, as a Kenyan, I'm not proud of it, is that you find that even the camps themselves, refugees, provide a source of livelihood for
employment.
Something that, again, even as a Kenyan, we are not very proud, because, again, you find that even children who are Kenyan children who are supposed to be going to school, sometimes because of the hardship and the marginalization that has happened in those areas, you find that they're actually being employed by refugees. So
these refugees are employing them out of the surplus of what they get from the agencies.
Yes, but not exactly in terms of surplus, because if you look at for example, the Turkana persons who in that area, because again of the lack of access to livelihoods, then they go to do just many jobs. But if I draw back to look at even the refugees who are living within the urban areas, if you look at Isli, if you look at Kayole, the actual benefits that we can gain from refugee community. For example, the issue of French, you find that many of these refugees who are coming to the country, some of them actually
better French than in French, so they bring.
But actually, some of them actually they actually have doctorates. They are people who can actually accrue benefits. That is, if the government was agreeable, and actually in the law, in the Refugee Act, it provides for access to work permits for refugees. It's a Class M work permit, which is supposed to be free. And if, for example, they are allowed, or essentially it's in the law, but administratively there are certain hurdles which make them not be able to access the work permit.
Rufus, part of the things that were mentioned in the deal yesterday was that these refugees, or the 80,000 that have already left, will have a soft landing in Somalia. What exactly is a soft landing? How do you ensure that they are integrated back into the society?
If you go back again to what is provided within the tripartite agreement, because the tripartite agreement, like I had mentioned before, sets out the modalities and the responsibilities of Kenya as the host state, and also Somalia as their country of origin, the place where they come from. So Somalia as a government, they have a duty and obligation to ensure, and that's the challenge that at the moment, and that's why we are cautioning even these calls for any sort of hasty repatriation, because there has to be we know that Somalia is coming in from a very post-conflict situation. There's need for rebuilding of infrastructure to ensure that there is proper livelihoods for these persons. But what the UNHCR and other partners, for example, even civil society on the other side of the border, what we at the moment trying to ensure is that because all the persons who are we call them now returnees, because when they come from Kenya now, as they go back into they're going to be returnees. So what sort of individual assistance packages, and that's what UNHCR and civil
society. So do you profile them to know what skill sets they have, and are they put on a stipend until a certain time where they can get employment, and how does it happen?
Yes.
And what's the process?
Essentially, at this particular time, UNHCR and actors like ourselves, we are doing what we call intention surveys, and in this we are profiling the Somali refugee caseload, and we are trying to identify to what would be their source of particular areas of return that they want to go back to, how large is their family size, so that you can be able actually to be able to sort of have an analysis of what would be their need. Already there are discussions within the network as to some sort of a stipend which has not yet been finalized. But the most important thing is to ensure that as they are crossing over, because it's not even about material support, it's even about elements like psychosocial support, because you find that someone has been living in Kenya for the last 20 years, perhaps. I mean, there's even that generation of
village.
And so many things have happened. So there's need also to sort of take them through that psychosocial support. So it's not just about the material support.
But also for a lot of the Kenyans of Somali origins who may have relatives and whatnot, and people living, especially in Isili, and most people are concerned. Just to clarify, this process is voluntary, so no one is being forced to go back.
Yes, and that's actually a key principle which is enshrined in the tripartite agreement, and it is our hope and our desire that essentially that the process, and when we talk about voluntary, again I go back to that element that it must be an informed choice, so that there's no coercion. But Bonnie, we must put out a caution at the moment is that we might say, and the government might be bold to say that the process is voluntary, but there's also an element that might we call it induced induced return, in the sense that the situation on the ground, there's a lot of pressure at the moment, and again I bring in a discussion about post-Westgate. We've seen quite a number of arrests, and which we appreciate, and we commend the government because of the collective security, and we are Kenyans, we need our country to be safe. But the caution we want to put out there that to be able for the process to be called or termed voluntary, what we are currently seeing is systematic arrest and a lot of arbitrary arrest that is happening both within, especially in different parts of the country. In Nairobi, in the western region, we have already been documenting some of these issues. But the other element about this process that we are talking about is the element that the return process must be done in safety and in dignity. And just to unpackage those two terms, when we talk about the element of safety, it has sort of three parts of it. There is the element of physical safety, such that if I am a Somali refugee and I've indicated or shown in the intention that I want to go back, then it's the responsibility of both the Kenya and the Somali government to ensure that in the physical safety, that there are no attacks along that particular route. There's also the element of safety, which we call material material support, such that when they go back, because now they're going back as citizens, so their rights should be restored fully
as citizens of Somalia.
As citizens of Somalia, so that if they had property, if they had land, then the government already in Somalia, and I know these are processes that they're already starting to ensure, is that then that right will be fully restored. The last one is on the issue of legal safety, and in this I want to bring the element of just the rights that accrue by them just being citizens of Somalia. Then that as they go back, there's no fear of further discrimination, because you realize that these persons are coming into the country, they were fleeing from their country because of well-founded fear of either persecution. So when they go back, then that element of legal safety should be protected.
All right, Rufus Karanja, I dare not add anything there. That is Rufus Karanja from the Refugee Consortium of Kenya. Asante sana.
Thank you very much.
Now we do know this process is indeed voluntary. It's indeed being driven by the Kenyan government, the Somalia government, and the UNHCR. And for all those who are airing a lot of concerns about this process, you can get in touch at the local UNHCR agency or any actors in the refugee space in Kenya.